I never meant to become the reason a police officer walked into Harbor and Finch that night, but by closing time, half the bar was staring at me like I had ruined everyone's favorite small-town secret. The rain had been falling since sunset, tapping against the front windows in silver lines, turning the harbor outside into a blur of boat lights and black water. Inside, the place smelled like fried pickles, wet coats, and cheap beer, with an old jukebox humming a country song nobody had paid for. I was behind the bar, wiping down the counter with one hand and checking the clock with the other, counting the minutes until I could lock up, take my tips, and go home to an apartment that still had a leaking bathroom sink and a pile of design sketches I was pretending would someday become a real career. My name is Ethan Miller, 27 years old, part-time bartender, part-time online interior design student, full-time expert at acting like I had everything under control. That night, I was failing at it. My dad had texted me during my break, one sentence sharp enough to sit under my ribs. "Are you ever going to grow up?" I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things back then. Then a man at the end of the bar started picking on Jamie, our newest server, a 19-year-old kid with nervous hands and a smile too soft for drunk customers. At first, it was just teasing. Then it turned mean. Jamie dropped a basket of fries, his face went pale, and something in me snapped. Not loudly, not bravely, just tiredly. I stepped between them and said, "That's enough." The man laughed like I was part of the entertainment. A chair scraped. Someone bumped the table. A glass tipped over and shattered on the floor. I raised my hands, trying to calm everyone down, but from the outside, I probably looked like the problem. By the time the front door opened and Officer Caleb Brooks stepped in, the whole room had gone quiet except for the rain and the jukebox. He was tall, calm, and annoyingly composed, with damp blonde hair, a navy uniform, and eyes that moved over the room like he was reading a story nobody else could see. I expected the usual question. "What did you do?" Instead, he looked at Jamie, then at me, and asked, "Who were you protecting?" I gave Officer Caleb Brooks the kind of look I usually reserve for customers who asked if the tips were really necessary, because the question landed too softly and somehow made me feel more exposed than an accusation would have. "I was protecting the floor from bad conversation," I said, pressing a napkin to the corner of my mouth even though it barely hurt. Caleb did not smile, but one eyebrow moved like it wanted to. He spoke to Jamie first, then to Marcy, the owner, then to two customers who had seen enough to confirm that I had not started anything on purpose. Nobody was arrested. Nobody was dragged outside. There was just paperwork, quiet voices, and the uncomfortable feeling of realizing that sometimes the worst thing about a scene is not the scene itself, but how tired you are afterward. By the time Marcy locked the register and told me to go home, my phone was dead, my jacket was missing, and my car keys had apparently decided to join whatever mysterious place single socks go to die. I tried to laugh it off, because laughing was easier than admitting I had no ride, no umbrella, and exactly $14 in cash. Caleb noticed anyway. Of course he did. "Where do you live?" he asked. That sounds like the beginning of a lecture. It is the beginning of a ride. I should have said no. Pride was practically my family business. But the rain outside had turned hard enough to bounce off the sidewalk, and my apartment was nearly 3 miles away on the other side of Harbor Street. So I climbed into the passenger seat of his patrol car and sat there with my hands folded like I was on my way to the principal's office. The car was warm, clean, and smelled faintly of coffee and cedar air freshener. Caleb turned the heat toward me without saying anything. After a minute, he handed me a bottle of water from the cup holder and a small packet of tissues from the glove compartment. "You always carry emergency supplies for dramatic bartenders?" I asked. "Only on Thursdays." It was Friday. I hated that I laughed. He drove through the wet streets slowly, past closed bait shops, dark cottages, and the diner near the pier that still glowed like a lighthouse. When my stomach betrayed me with a loud, tragic noise, Caleb pulled into the parking lot without asking. "You need food." "I need my dignity." "They are out of that." "Soup is available." 10 minutes later, I was holding a paper bowl of chicken noodle soup while he wrote something in a small notebook. I leaned over, suspicious. "Are you documenting my crimes?" He glanced down, then back at the road. "No, I am writing down that you like extra crackers." For reasons I could not explain, that was the moment I stopped feeling cold. But when we reached my building, the porch light was flickering, Water was running under my front door, and the night somehow found a brand new way to get worse. For a full 5 seconds, I just stood there in the rain holding a paper bowl of soup, watching water creep across the floor of my apartment like the building itself had finally decided to evict me. Caleb moved first. He stepped past me, careful and calm, found the shutoff valve under the bathroom sink, and twisted it until the awful rushing sound slowed to a sad little drip. I should have thanked him. Instead, I said, "Great. Very cozy. Indoor creek. People pay extra for that in luxury rentals." He looked over his shoulder, his uniform damp from the rain, his expression unreadable. "Do you always make jokes when your life is actively flooding?" "Only when it is indoors." My landlord did not answer the emergency number. My upstairs neighbor was out of town. My couch was wet, my sketchbooks were stacked on the kitchen counter by some small mercy, and my dignity was somewhere beneath 2 inches of cold water. Caleb made 2 calls, spoke in that steady voice of his, and got a maintenance crew scheduled for morning. Then he looked at me, and I could tell he was about to say something practical that would make me feel pathetic. "You cannot stay here tonight," he said. There it was. I folded my arms. I have slept in worse places. That is not a strong argument. It is the only one I have. He glanced around the tiny apartment, at the peeling paint, the thrift store lamp, the wall covered in color samples and floor plans I had taped up like proof that I was still becoming someone. His eyes paused there, softer than before. "You design rooms?" I swallowed. "I try to." He nodded like that mattered. Like trying was not embarrassing. Then he said, "I have a guest room." I laughed too fast. "Absolutely not." 15 minutes later, I was absolutely sitting in his kitchen wearing dry socks he had given me, while an elderly orange cat stared at me from the table like I had violated several ancient laws. "That is Captain Pancake," Caleb said, setting my damp shoes near the heater. He looks disappointed in me. That is his usual face. Caleb's house was small, white, and painfully neat, tucked on a quiet street 6 blocks from the harbor. Everything had a place. Mugs hung by size. The mail sat in a wooden tray. The couch had exactly 2 pillows, both beige, which felt less like decorating and more like surrender. "You live like a suburban dad trapped in a 29-year-old body," I said. Caleb opened a cabinet. "You fold towels like a raccoon learning human customs." I hated that I laughed again. Later, when the house went quiet and rain tapped gently against the windows, I woke from a dream I could not remember with my heart racing. I found Caleb in the kitchen, already awake, making tea as if he had been expecting the night to need something warm. He did not ask me to explain. He just slid a mug across the table and sat across from me under the soft yellow light. For once, I did not make a joke. For once, silence did not feel like being left alone. By morning, Caleb's guest room had become a temporary country with too many rules. Rule 1, wet towels went on the hook, not the chair. Rule 2, coffee grounds went in the compost bin, not the trash. Rule 3, Captain Pancake was not allowed on the kitchen table, though Captain Pancake seemed deeply unaware of any government that outranked him. My apartment needed at least a week of repairs, maybe longer if my landlord continued treating responsibility like a rumor, so I told myself I was not staying with Caleb. I was merely occupying a mattress under protest while my life dried out. Caleb, to his credit, did not make me feel like a charity case. He left for his morning run at 5:30, which I considered suspicious behavior, and came back with a paper bag from the bakery near the pier. "Blueberry muffin," he said, placing it beside my coffee. "You look like someone who argues before breakfast." "I do not argue before breakfast," I said. I establish emotional boundaries with the morning. That was how the week began, with small arguments that somehow turned into routines. I learned Caleb took his coffee black, washed dishes immediately after using them, and labeled leftovers with dates like the refrigerator was evidence storage. He learned I hummed when I sketched, talked to plants as if they were coworkers, and believed every room needed at least one warm lamp or it was legally a waiting room. On Tuesday, I made chili so spicy Caleb took one bite and stared into the distance like he had seen the edge of the universe. On Wednesday, he repaired the loose leg on my old drafting stool without mentioning that it had nearly folded me in half. On Thursday, Captain Pancake abandoned his owner completely and fell asleep on my hoodie, purring like a tiny engine with no loyalty. The real project started when I noticed Caleb's front porch looked like it had given up sometime during the previous decade. The boards were solid, But the railing was dull, the chairs were weather-stained, and the whole space felt like nobody had ever sat there long enough to watch the sunset. This porch is emotionally unavailable, I told him. Caleb looked at the railing. It is a porch. Exactly what an emotionally unavailable porch would want you to think. Somehow, by Saturday afternoon, we were sanding wood, choosing paint, and arguing in the hardware store over whether sage green was too bold. Caleb said beige was safe. I said beige was what happened when colors lost hope. He bought the sage green. That evening, we sat on the half-painted porch eating takeout from cardboard containers, our shoulders almost touching, the harbor lights blinking in the distance. I showed him the folder on my tablet labeled Future Studio, full of floor plans for cafes, bookstores, and tiny homes I wanted to design. Someday. He did not laugh. He did not say someday was unrealistic. He just studied every sketch carefully and said, "You make empty places look like they are waiting for someone to belong there." I looked away because my throat had gone tight, and for once, I had no clever answer ready. By the end of the first week, the town had started doing what small towns do best, turning facts into entertainment. I heard it first at the bakery near the pier, while buying cinnamon rolls for Caleb because he had fixed my drafting stool and because apparently I had become the kind of person who noticed what a man ate with his coffee. Two women by the window lowered their voices the second I walked in, which only made every word clearer. The bartender is staying with Officer Brooks. Poor Caleb, always rescuing strays. I kept my face calm, paid for the rolls, and walked back into the fog with the paper bag warm against my chest and my stomach feeling strangely hollow. I told myself it was ridiculous to care. I had been called worse than a stray. By lunchtime, Marcy had texted me 3 question marks and 1 eye emoji. By dinner, Jamie asked if Caleb and I were, and then turned the color of tomato soup before finishing the sentence. I laughed it off because that was my one reliable talent. Caleb did not seem bothered. He came home from his shift, hung up his jacket, fed Captain Pancake, and asked if I wanted grilled cheese with tomato soup, like the entire town was not quietly building a soap opera around his kitchen table. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me more nervous. Caleb had a clean life, a respected job, neighbors who waved at him, and a porch that now looked charming enough to appear on a postcard. I had a water-damaged apartment, a reputation for trouble, and a talent for turning peaceful rooms complicated. The misunderstanding happened on Friday evening. I had stopped by the station to return a travel mug he left in my tote bag, and I heard his voice through the half-open break room door. "It is temporary," he said. He just needed a place to stay. I froze before I could hear anything else. Temporary. Needed. A place. Each word landed neatly. In the softest, most foolish part of me, I left the mug with the front desk and walked back to his house in the cold, already embarrassed by how much I had started to belong there. That night, while Caleb was in the shower, I packed my clothes into a laundry bag. Captain Pancake sat on the bed watching me with open disapproval. "Do not look at me like that," I whispered. "You knew this was not permanent." Caleb found me by the front door with my shoes on and my hoodie half-zipped. His hair was damp, and for once, his calm expression cracked. "Where are you going?" "Home. Your apartment is not ready. It is dry enough." He took one careful step closer. "Ethan, what happened?" I smiled too brightly, the way I always did when I was about to make something worse. "Nothing. You were right. It is temporary. I just needed a place to stay." His face changed then, not with anger, but with the slow realization of someone hearing the damage after the words had already left. I wanted him to explain. I wanted him to say I had misunderstood. But wanting felt dangerous, so I opened the door before he could stop me. I made it halfway down Caleb's porch steps before the sky split open again, because apparently even the weather in Harbor Point had a flair for timing. Rain poured over the street in silver sheets, soaking my hoodie before I reached the sidewalk. Behind me, the front door opened, but Caleb did not call my name in that commanding officer voice I had expected. He just stood there under the porch light, quiet enough to make leaving feel less like escape and more like a choice I was making badly. "I was talking to Chief Harris," he said. "He asked if I had filed the housing assistance note for your landlord dispute. I said your stay was temporary because I did not want the department treating your private life like paperwork." I kept my back to him, because if I turned around, my face would give me away. "You could have said that before I packed my emotional support laundry bag." I know. That was the problem with Caleb. He never wasted words defending himself when an apology would do. I wanted to stay angry, but thunder rolled over the rooftops, and somewhere downtown, a siren began to wail. Caleb's radio crackled from inside the house. The storm had knocked power out near the community center, and families from the low streets were being moved to the high school gym. Caleb looked at me, rain catching in his lashes. I have to go. I nodded too quickly. Then go. He hesitated. I could use someone who knows how to make a room feel less like a disaster. That was how I ended up in the passenger seat again, not because I had forgiven him completely, but because people needed blankets, warm coffee, and a little dignity under fluorescent lights. The high school gym smelled like wet sneakers, floor wax, and nervous energy. Kids sat on folded mats. Parents checked phones with no signal. An elderly woman kept asking whether her cat had been brought from the shelter van. Caleb moved through the crowd like a lighthouse in human form, steady and familiar, remembering names, medications, allergies, and who needed a quiet corner. I watched him kneel beside a little boy afraid of thunder and offer him a flashlight like it was a secret badge of courage. Then I got to work. I dragged tables into smaller circles, taped paper stars to the walls, turned extra sheets into makeshift dividers, and convinced the cafeteria staff that hot cocoa was not optional in an emergency. Within an hour, the gym looked less like a holding area and more like a place people could breathe. Caleb found me near the supply closet, untangling string lights someone had donated from a fall festival. "You did this," he said softly. I shrugged. Beige would have been faster. His mouth twitched, but his eyes were tired in a way I had not seen before. Later, when the worst of the storm had passed, we sat on the bleachers with paper cups of coffee cooling between us. Caleb told me about his best friend, Daniel, who had been hurt years ago during a late-night call outside a bar, and how Caleb had spent every year since believing that if he stayed controlled enough, careful enough, he could keep bad things from reaching the people around him. I did not know what to say, so I did something he had done for me. I sat beside him in the quiet and stayed. By the time the power came back, the gym erupted in tired applause, the kind people give when they are too worn out to cheer, but too relieved to stay silent. Caleb stood beside me near the supply tables, his shoulder brushing mine for one brief second before he stepped away like the contact had startled him. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I had spent the whole night noticing him. The way he handed blankets to parents before they asked, the way he softened his voice for scared kids, the way he carried his own grief so quietly it almost looked like strength. When the last family was settled and the rain had thinned to a whisper, we drove back to his house, without music. Captain Pancake greeted us at the door with the offended cry of a cat who had survived several hours without personal staff. Caleb went to make tea. I went to the porch because the air smelled clean after the storm, and the sage green railing gleamed under the porch light like proof that some things really could change with a little sanding and patience. Caleb joined me with 2 mugs. We stood close enough that warmth moved between us, close enough that silence began to feel like a question. He reached past me to set his mug on the railing, and for one impossible second, I thought he might kiss me. His eyes dropped to my mouth, then lifted back to mine, full of something careful and bright and terrified. Then he stepped back. "Ethan," he said, voice low, "you are staying in my house. I am still the officer connected to your case. I do not want you to ever feel pressured." The words were decent, thoughtful, exactly the kind of thing a good man would say. So naturally, they hurt like absolute garbage. I laughed once, too sharp. "Right. Rules." His brow tightened. "That is not what I meant." "No, I understand. You have a rule for towels, a rule for coffee grounds, a rule for feelings, apparently. I am trying to be respectful. You are trying to be safe," I said, and the truth of it made my voice shake. "There is a difference." Caleb set his jaw, and for the first time since I had met him, frustration broke through his calm. "And you make everything a joke before anyone can. Get close enough to disappoint you." That stopped me cold, not because it was cruel, but because it was accurate. My grip tightened around the mug. Maybe because being close to people has not exactly been a successful long-term investment for me. His face softened immediately, but I was already stepping away. We had both touched the bruise beneath the other person's shirt, and neither of us knew how to apologize without making it worse. I packed again, quieter this time. Caleb did not block the door. He only said, "I do not want you to leave angry." I looked at him, At the warm little house, at Captain Pancake sitting by my bag like a tiny judge. I am not angry, I said. I am just remembering how to leave before it matters. My apartment was dry when I got back, freshly cleaned and painfully empty. I slept on the couch because the bedroom felt too silent. Across town, I imagined Caleb in his perfect kitchen, surrounded by rules that had finally done their job and kept him completely alone. For 2 weeks, Caleb and I became experts at almost texting first, almost apologizing, almost turning around when we saw each other across the grocery store aisle, only to pretend we were both very interested in canned tomatoes. Harbor Point kept moving in its small, stubborn way. The streets dried. The boats returned to the marina. My apartment stopped smelling like wet drywall. I went back to work at Harbor and Finch with a new rule for myself. No saving people by setting myself on fire. I did not know whether growth was supposed to feel inspiring, but mostly it felt like biting my tongue and doing laundry. Jamie noticed the difference before I did. He was less jumpy now, more confident carrying trays, but he still looked over his shoulder whenever certain customers got too loud. On a Thursday night, just before closing, one of the regulars started needling him about a spilled drink. The air shifted. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just enough for my body to remember the old pattern. Step in, get loud, become the wall because nobody else will. My hands curled around the towel beneath the counter. Then I thought of Caleb on the bleachers, telling me how fear could disguise itself as control. I thought of his porch, his careful eyes, his ridiculous beige pillows, and the way he had asked who I was protecting before deciding who I was. So I breathed in, walked around the bar, and stood beside Jamie instead of in front of him. "We are done serving you tonight," I said evenly. The man scoffed, but Marcy was already at the phone, and Jamie was already moving toward the back office like we had practiced. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a joke. I did not become the storm just because one had entered the room. When Caleb arrived with another officer, everything was already calm. His eyes found mine, searching for damage that was not there. Outside in the alley, under the soft buzz of the security light, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. I wanted to make it worse, I admitted. Caleb leaned against the brick wall, giving me space, always giving me space even when I wished he would not. "I know. Are you disappointed I did not?" His answer came gently, without hesitation. "No. I am proud you did not have to." The words hit harder than any lecture could have. I looked down at my shoes, at a puddle reflecting the yellow sign above the back door. "I heard what you said at the station and turned it into proof that I should run." Caleb nodded once. "And I let you leave because I thought giving you freedom meant staying silent." For a moment, we were just two men standing behind a bar after midnight, tired of being protected by our worst habits. "I am sorry," I said. "Me too," Caleb answered. Then Jamie opened the back door, saw us, and immediately whispered, "Oh, absolutely not," before disappearing again. I laughed. Caleb did too, quiet and surprised, and the sound felt like the first warm light in a room I had thought was closed for good. 3 months later, my studio opened in a narrow brick storefront between a flower shop and a used bookstore, with sage green trim around the windows because some colors deserved a second chance. I called it Miller House Design, which sounded far more official than one man, one laptop, 2 folding chairs, and a coffee maker that made a noise like it was reconsidering its career. Still, when I unlocked the door that first morning, the room smelled like fresh paint, cedar shelves, and blueberry muffins Marcy had dropped off before sunrise. Jamie brought a plant and told me not to kill it because it had survived enough already. My father came too, standing awkwardly near the door in a jacket he only wore for weddings and court dates. He looked around at the warm lamps, the fabric samples, the framed sketches, and the tiny waiting area I had built from thrift store chairs and stubborn hope. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he cleared his throat and said, "You made this place feel like you." It was not a perfect apology, but it was a beginning, and for once, I let a beginning be enough. Caleb arrived last, out of uniform, wearing a navy sweater and carrying a bouquet of sunflowers that looked almost comically bright in his careful hands. Behind him, in a soft-sided carrier, Captain Pancake complained with the dramatic sorrow of a cat who had been transported against his artistic wishes. Caleb handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card with his neat handwriting, "For the man who makes every room feel like home." I read it twice because the first time my eyes blurred. That is dangerously sentimental for you, Officer Brooks, I said. I am off duty. So you admit there are feelings when the uniform comes off. His ears turned pink, and I loved him a little more for it. We were not perfect after that. Caleb still labeled leftovers. I still left pencils in places no pencil had any business being. He still got quiet when he was scared. I still made jokes when I needed to be honest. But we learned. Slowly, clumsily, kindly. We learned to say stay before the door opened. We learned to say I am afraid before fear became a fight. That evening, after everyone left, I locked the studio and found Caleb waiting under the streetlight as soft rain silvered the sidewalk. He held out his hand, not as an order, not as a rescue, but as an invitation. Captain Pancake glared from the carrier at his feet. Taking me home? I asked. Caleb smiled, warm and unguarded, the harbor lights glowing behind him. No, he said, taking us home. And as we walked through the rain toward the little white house with the sage-green porch, I finally understood that home was not the place where nothing ever went wrong. Home was the place where someone stayed long enough to help you make it right.